They never noticed what she stopped wearing. They never asked why she smiled less. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 72 years old. For 38 years I worked as a school cafeteria cook in a small town in Ohio. I woke up before sunrise, packed lunches that weren't mine, and fed children whose names I remembered better than my own family remembered my birthdays. I never thought I would grow old feeling invisible, but here I am. I used to wear my gold necklace every single day. It wasn't expensive by modern standards, but it was mine. My late husband Robert gave it to me on our 10th anniversary. He said, "This isn't gold because of its price. It's gold because it stays." After he died, the necklace became my courage. Until one day, I stopped wearing it. No one noticed. Not my son Daniel. Not my daughter Susan. Not even my grandchildren who used to tug at it when they hugged me. It started when my arthritis worsened. Cooking became painful. Climbing stairs felt like betrayal by my own body. So Daniel suggested gently but firmly, "Mom, maybe it's time you stop living alone." Susan nodded quickly. "It's safer. And honestly, we're busy." Busy. That word can erase an entire person. They moved me into a small back room of Daniel's house. At first I was grateful. I cooked when I could. Folded laundry slowly. Watched the kids when my hands allowed it. But gratitude has a way of turning into expectation. An expectation into silence. Meals changed. At the dinner table, plates filled fast, but my seat stayed empty. "Mom already ate," Susan would say. I hadn't. Sometimes I would hear laughter from the dining room while I sat in my room with a cup of tea pretending my stomach wasn't aching. That's when Emily noticed. She was not family. She was the college student renting Daniel's basement to save money. 21 years old. Always polite. Always tired. One evening she knocked softly on my door. "Mrs. Wilson, did you eat?" I lied. "Yes, dear." She didn't argue. She just came back 10 minutes later with a bowl of warm soup and a piece of bread. She placed it on my table like it mattered. From that day on, Emily became my quiet miracle. She fed me when no one was watching. Left fruit by my door. Made extra rice by accident. Sat with me while I ate, never rushed, never annoyed. She called me Grandma Margaret. No one had called me that in years. One night after everyone was asleep, I took out my gold necklace. I held it for a long time. And then I walked into the kitchen. I opened the rice container. And at the bottom of the jar, I placed the necklace inside. Carefully, like a promise. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it out of clarity. Because gratitude deserves memory. And memory deserves justice. Weeks passed. My health declined quietly, just like my presence had. Daniel and Susan spoke around me, not to me. Doctor appointments were postponed. Pain became routine. Emily stayed. Always Emily. One evening she found me struggling to breathe. She called the ambulance. Held my hand. Cried like I mattered. At the hospital, my children arrived late. Apologized quickly. Checked their phones often. I watched them without resentment. Only understanding. That night I asked Emily to come close. "My dear," I whispered, "when the time comes, remember the rice jar." She looked confused. But she nodded. I passed away 3 days later. Quietly. No drama. Just a life ending the way it had been lived at the end. Unnoticed by those who shared my blood. But the house didn't stay quiet. Because weeks later, they opened the rice jar and found what I left behind, along with a note, written in shaking ink. For the one who fed me, when I was forgotten. They searched for memories. They found judgment. Margaret Wilson's house didn't feel empty after the funeral. It felt exposed. As if the walls had been listening all along and were finally ready to speak. Daniel stood in the kitchen 3 days after the burial, staring at the counter, where his mother used to sit when her knees hurt too much to stand. The chair was still there. Unused. Susan moved around restlessly, opening cabinets, closing them again, looking for something she couldn't name. We should clean, she said. Donate her things. Daniel nodded. Yeah, no point keeping clutter. Clutter. That's what a life becomes when it's over. Emily stood quietly near the doorway. She hadn't spoken much since the funeral. She didn't feel like she belonged in this moment, yet she was the only one who felt like Margaret was still there. She remembered the whisper. Remember the rice jar? Susan lifted a glass container from the pantry shelf. Why does Mom keep so much rice? She muttered. She tilted the jar. Something heavy hit the bottom with a dull clink. Metal. Daniel frowned. What's that? Susan opened the lid, poured the rice into a bowl, and then silence. At the bottom of the jar lay a gold necklace coiled gently, untouched by time. Susan's breath caught. Isn't that? Daniel stared. That's Mom's. Emily's hands trembled. Susan picked it up. I thought she lost this years ago. Daniel frowned. Or sold it. She never wore it anymore. At the bottom of the jar, a folded piece of paper, yellowed, deliberate. Emily stepped forward. There's a note. Susan unfolded it. Read aloud. For the one who fed me. When I was forgotten. The words didn't echo. They settled, like dust after a collapse. Susan laughed nervously. What does that mean? Daniel didn't answer, because he already knew, and he hated that he did. Emily felt her knees weaken. She covered her mouth. No, she didn't. Susan looked up sharply. Didn't what? Emily's voice was barely there. She told me to remember the rice jar. Daniel turned. You? Emily nodded. I didn't know what she meant. I swear. Susan's face hardened. Why would Mom leave you something? Emily shook her head. I never asked for anything. That was the truth. Daniel picked up the necklace. It felt heavier than gold. He remembered his father clasping it around Margaret's neck. He remembered how it used to catch the light when she laughed. When was the last time he'd seen her laugh? Susan crossed her arms. So what she's saying, we didn't feed her? No one answered. Because everyone remembered. The missed meals. The assumptions. The silence. Emily spoke softly. She used to eat in her room. Susan snapped. She never complained. Emily met her eyes. She shouldn't have had to. The room changed. Not loudly, but permanently. That night Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked into his mother's old room, sat on her bed, noticed things he'd ignored. The empty teacup by the window, the stack of napkins in the drawer like she was saving food for later, the calendar with small circles around certain days, Sundays, every Sunday. Daniel pressed his hands into his face. She was waiting, he whispered. Susan went home angry, but anger has a way of dissolving when it meets truth. She opened her fridge, full, remembered how her mother's room had smelled faintly of instant soup. She sat on the floor and cried. Emily didn't cry. She felt something heavier. Responsibility. She didn't want the necklace. She wanted Margaret to be remembered correctly. The next morning, Daniel called a family meeting. Emily didn't expect to be invited, but she was. Daniel placed the necklace on the table. I think Mom wanted you to have this. Susan protested. That's ridiculous. Daniel raised his voice. No. What's ridiculous is pretending we don't know why. Silence. Emily shook her head. I can't take it. Susan scoffed. Why not? You earned it. Emily looked at her. I didn't feed her to be rewarded. That stopped them. Daniel swallowed. Then what do we do? Emily thought of Margaret's smile. The quiet one. The forgiving one. She didn't want revenge, Emily said. She wanted truth. So they told it. At the church. At the community center. To the grandchildren. They told people how Margaret Wilson spent her last years, not abandoned, but overlooked. The necklace wasn't sold. It was donated, melted, turned into 4 small gold pendants, each engraved with the same words. When I was forgotten, Emily didn't keep one. She didn't need proof. She had memory. Months later, Daniel volunteers at a soup kitchen. Susan visits her elderly neighbors every Sunday. Not out of guilt, but awareness. And Emily. Emily keeps the rice jar, empty now, on a shelf in her small apartment. A reminder that kindness is often quiet, but justice remembers. They thought it ended with her breath. They were wrong. Margaret Wilson was gone, but she was no longer invisible. The first time Daniel served food at the soup kitchen, his hands shook. Not because the work was hard, but because every tray he passed forward felt like an apology that could never reach its destination. An elderly man smiled at him and said, "God bless you, son." Daniel almost broke, because he realized something his mother had known long before him. Being fed is not just about food. It's about dignity. Susan's change was quieter. She didn't announce it, didn't post about it. Every Sunday she began visiting the older woman 2 houses down. Her name was Mrs. Adler. Widowed, childless, forgotten. Susan brought groceries, sat, listened. At first, it felt forced. Then it felt necessary. Then it felt human. And Emily carried Margaret with her in ways no one else could see. She kept the empty rice jar on a shelf above her desk. Whenever life felt rushed or unfair, she looked at it and remembered that doing the right thing doesn't always get applause. Sometimes it gets silence, and sometimes it gets justice later. One afternoon, months after Margaret's passing, Emily received a letter from the school district in Ohio. They had heard Margaret's story at the community center. They were starting a small nutrition scholarship for students, entering food services and care. They wanted to name it the Margaret Wilson Grant for quiet caregivers. Emily cried for a long time, not because she won, but because Margaret had been seen. At the dedication ceremony, Daniel stood at the podium. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "My mother fed people her whole life," he said, "and when she needed it most, we forgot." The room was silent, but one person didn't. He turned toward Emily. She shook her head slightly. But he continued, "This is not about blame. It's about memory." After the ceremony, a little girl tugged on Emily's sleeve. "Are you the one who fed Grandma Margaret?" Emily knelt. "Yes," she said softly. The girl smiled. "My mom says that makes you rich." Emily smiled back. "I already was." Years passed. Time did what it always does, but some lessons stayed. Daniel never let an elderly person eat alone if he could help it. Susan stopped assuming silence meant comfort. And Emily became a social worker. Not because of ambition, but because of one woman who ate soup quietly behind a closed door. The gold necklace no longer existed in its original form, but its meaning had multiplied. For pendants, for reminders, not of guilt, but of responsibility. Margaret Wilson never raised her voice, never demanded love, never asked to be rewarded. She simply noticed who showed up and remembered them. And somewhere beyond this world, if justice has a sound, it probably sounds like a rice jar opening and a promise being kept. The end. If this story touched your heart, like For the Ones Who Feed Quietly. Subscribe for stories that honor truth. Comment kindness is never forgotten, because sometimes the smallest acts carry the heaviest justice.